53 as a priest on Easter Sunday this April. He's a well-known writer on environmental themes. He spent more than 20 years in the Philippines, 15 of which with the Tiboli people, where he gained first-hand experience of climate change effects. He is an eco-theologian who is raising awareness of these issues. He has worked on the publication of Pope Francis' Laudato Si. There would be some slides at the end in chat for you. The slides will be at the end for you to pick up later. Father Sean. Where's he gone?
It's gone.
Oh,
Where
he's
are you?
coming, he's coming. Click to the left and to the center.
We're just waiting for a link again.
Hello, good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
And for those of you who have just joined us, please introduce yourself in the chat. Thank you.
What's happened? Oh, I need to share, don't I? What's happened? What's happened? What's happened?
It's back.
Here it is now.
What?
No, I need to do the slides, don't I?
Yeah.
Where's the, what's happening? Oh, there it is. Okay. Go ahead, Father Sean.
So good evening from Ireland to people from all over the world who have gathered this evening for this reflection on the importance of biodiversity. I'll quote here a man who's just died recently, a man called Dr. Edward Winson. He was the former professor of botany in Harvard University. And 20 years ago, he said, in the year 2000, that the quenching of life's exuberance will be much more consequential to humanity than all present-day warming, ozone depletion, and pollution combined. So that's the world which we are opening up in this area. And as I said, this man, over the years, Dr. Wilson did extraordinary work on in insects, basically, in the Amazon. Now, this is an area that isn't to the forefront of Catholic social teaching until very recently. Many of you will know, for example, of this volume, the Compendium of the Social Teachings of the Church. It's about 500 pages long. The text runs for about 300 pages. But what's on biodiversity? This was published in 2004. What's on biodiversity? There is one paragraph on biodiversity, the most important reality facing our planet. And there's also one paragraph on climate change. So that's the context that we need to understand where we've come from, because in both on climate change and on the destruction of biodiversity, as a church, particularly the Central Church, was not at the races until Laudato Si appeared in June 2015. Now, in my own way, I was a bit involved with Laudato Si. For example, in 2013, Cardinal Turkson contacted me and asked me would I be interested in preparing something for his department as it was at the Vatican at that time. So obviously, I wrote something on all of these issues, particularly the issue of biodiversity. And I presented to him early on in 2014. But actually, I got a letter from him when it went from his department, because he then spoke to to Pope Francis, and they decided to make an encyclical of the document. But I got an email from him in August 2014 saying that they wouldn't actually discuss biodiversity because it was too controversial. Now, the reality is it has a superb presentation on biodiversity in Laudato Si. And to a certain extent, I presume the Pope himself, because he's from Latin America and had been educated himself by the bishops of the Amazon, began to understand the reality of the importance of biodiversity. So we go on to the next slide. So it's, as I say, it's extremely important to us. So we'll take the next slide as well. So life began in the oceans, but actually 3,800 million years ago. We don't know how many species live on the planet with us. In a sense, if you go to London, if you go to the Kew Gardens, you will find that they have some information about probably 1.8 million species. It's one of the great centers of the world that has kept up with this reality. And I've been there numerous times over the past 40 years. My own interest in this has come as a Colombian. I studied anthropology at one stage, and I worked in Mindanao. And I was asked to go and work with a tribal people called the Tiboli people, who lived in the center of Mindanao. And of course, I saw the reality of the horrible destruction of life with the destruction of the tropical rainforest. I mean, for example, in a single hectare of rainforest, of the Terracarp rainforest in Southeast Asia, you could get up to 100 different species of trees. Contrast that with my own country. Of all of Ireland, we have about 26 different species of trees that are indigenous to this country. So there is a tragedy that many of the poorer countries of the world actually are extraordinarily rich in biodiversity, but it is actually being taken away from them. So the problem of today is extinction between 1,000 and 10,000 times higher than the background rate of extinction. So we're now living in the 6th largest extinction of life since life began. The last one happened 65 million years ago when an asteroid crashed into the area where Mexico is now and created such destruction across the world that 60% of the species did not survive, including the dinosaur. This time, unfortunately, it is humans, not an asteroid, who are doing the damage. I'd like to pay respects there to David Attenborough. Over the last 50 years, he's done extraordinary work in educating ourselves about the reality of the wonder of our planet and the wonderful resources that are in it. Yes. So the scale of the problem, 24% of large animals are facing extinction. The fish, 25,000 fish species are also under pressure, and almost 30% of our birds. This is extraordinary, and this has all happened in the last 100 years. So particularly primates, our primate cousins, orangutans, gorillas, gibbons are all in danger at this moment. Species are actually becoming extinct before they're classified for how they might actually be able to support us in terms of things that can be used for health reasons for human beings or for food in the future. So there's a great tragedy there at the very moment. At the moment when in maybe 20 years ago, we felt that 500,000 species might become extinct in this century. Now we're thinking it might be 1 million species, which would be an enormous destruction for every generation of animals and of humans that will live on this planet into the future. Yes. The next slide, please. One of the areas how I became involved in this was when I went to Lakes of Boo and saw the destruction that was taking place. I hardly knew how to understand it. How can you make sense of this as a Christian person and as a missionary at this time? And thank be to God, there was one person who had a real interest in that. That was Thomas Berry. And on my way back to the Philippines in 1980, I spent a couple of months with him in New York. And that helped me to understand the wonder of our planet and actually what we were doing about it. And that we as religious people were not shouting the loudest to protect God's creation. Because this time, as I say, this extinction, the sixth extinction, is only, it is the responsibility of one species, that's Homo sapiens. We cause the extinction in many ways, habitat destruction. I saw that all the time in the Philippines. Almost every single one of the 5 different forests in the Philippines have been destroyed over the last 100 years. And there will be extraordinary effects into the future, because in many of these areas, when the forest is destroyed within 20 or 30 years, particularly if you have typhoons, the soils will go with them. So we're in a real difficult situation there. As I said, in some of these areas, you could get 100 species per hectare, which is extraordinary. The water systems are also under enormous pressure, and fisheries. We are fishing stocks are depleting very rapidly, as coral reefs and mangrove forests, the area of the oceans, which produce much of the life of the oceans, which in effect is the food for up to 1 billion or 1.5 billion people on our planet. So I basically, the destruction of the Philippines forest was what gave me the impetus to actually begin to study this in detail. So that's the place I lived in Lake Cebu. It's an extraordinary place. The forest was still intact in that area, but a lot of people were coming in to try to log it. And one of the things we started there in the 1980s was just to stop that, though that was very difficult. There was a friend of mine, a priest in Bukidnon, who lost his life trying to defend the forest at that time. There's a shot of what happens when you go in logging and destroy the forest. Next slide, please. That's the kind of timber that came out from the forest, and many times we were giving employment to workers, but we were forgetting what this was doing to the planet. That's the scene of a forest that had 100 species in every hectare, and now it's been absolutely wasted. There were 2 of my friends, Tiboli, living and really did not understand what was happening in the world around them. It was just falling apart, and no one was able to tell them what things could we do. And we didn't at that stage. As I said, in the social teachings of the church, there was 1 paragraph on the destruction of species and 1 paragraph on climate change. It's not confined to plants and animals, species of birds, marine life, overfishing. For example, in 2002, the estimated 75% of the world's fisheries were restricted beyond their capacity. So that's extraordinary into the future. As more and more people live on the planet, where are they going to get food if we do not ensure that areas, particularly of the oceans, are protected from extinction in the next 20 or 30 years? 9 out of 19 fishing zones, which basically the species of fish have dropped dramatically. For example, bluefin tuna are down 80% of what they were in the 1960s. Herrings are down also. So is cod, and so is North Atlantic salmon. And as I said, our insect life has been extraordinary. In the last 40 years, we have lost 40% of our insect life Coral reefs developed over hundreds of years. About 25% of them, they cover almost 25% of the fish in our world, and they provide food for at least a billion species. So they're essentially very important, but they are changing too, because the oceans are heating up, and that has an extraordinary effect on coral reefs, as we see both in Southeast Asia and also in Australia at the moment. Corals are destroyed by siltation, erosion from land. I saw it in the Philippines be destroyed by dynamite, which is extraordinary, or also by cyanide. And again, that was extraordinary. And you're certainly leaving no hope to the future of any species, and particularly humans, in the future if you destroy everything like that. There's coral reefs in good state, and the next one shows them in awful condition, just wiped out, and all the life that depend on them are lost in that area, and that's been happening regularly over the past 50 years. Mangrove forests, I say, another ecosystem in the shallow waters, they're under threat globally. 54 species of mangrove worldwide. Of those, 35 were found in the Philippines. Again, like many situations in the ocean, they're being destroyed. The same is true in many other countries of Southeast Asia. 30% in Malaysia, 40% in Indonesia. So really, we're doing enormous damage to the life systems of the planet, and very often they don't get the same publicity as other areas because they're in areas like the Philippines or Thailand, and there's not much people interested in news coming from those areas. So amphibians are under threat. Frogs, toads, newts, all of those are under threat. In 1980, science began to know a dramatic decline in amphibian population. 1 in 3 are seriously endangered in one way or another. More than 120 species are thought to have become extinct during the last 25 years. So these are some of those. And again, extraordinary destruction. As I say, Kew Gardens has some information on 1.8 million species, but there may be 10 times that many species on the planet, or even 100 times. So on to the next. Other ways, of course, organic chlorine in pesticides and heavy metals like cadmium and zinc. Also, the depletion of the ozone layer and chemical pollution is also causing enormous destruction to life systems on the planet at the moment, plants and animals. Let's say butterflies, all insect species. I say in the last 40 years alone, 40% of insects in Europe have disappeared. Now that's extraordinary because in many of our foodstuffs, about 25 to 30% of our foodstuffs comes from pollination. So if there are no insects in the future, the bees or insects to pollinate, it will have an extraordinary impact on our species and on other species too that depend on this cycle of life to continue. So as I said early on, about 10% of birds globally are facing extinction. That's 30% of all the birds of the world, and I can see that happening here in my own country. And they pollinate crops, they control insects and rodents, they sow seeds. Their beauty inspires us, our human imagination. It would be horrible to see many species go extinct in the next 20 or 30 years, but that's where we're moving. Next, of course, is always local. And basically, when we're beginning to look at biodiversity, we have to look at what's happening in our own areas and to begin to divide ways of dealing with them. For example, zebra mussels moved into Ireland since the 1990s and are a major problem in the area in which I live in North Tipperary on the Shannon River. Yeah. So here again, the grey squirrel came into Ireland in 2011. They're larger than the red squirrel, and also they tend to kill them. So in many situations, like here in Dalgan now, in Navan, there are no brown squirrels left there. The only squirrels we have now are the grey squirrels. So varroa mite also is doing enormous damage to bees in many areas. Again, it came into Ireland in the 1990s. Have a flower that a lot of people like down a place like Kerry, rhododendron, but again, it's doing negative impact on other species, as are the Chinese crabs doing the same kind of trouble down in the southeast in the Shore Valley. And other areas are oil spill or heavy metal pollution, and also they affect fisheries. In 1985, 20,000 tons of fish taken from the water. By the late 1990s, that's down to 2,100, and that's gone down even more ever since. Another area, of course, that is doing enormous damage to wildlife is, of course, climate change. Now, we got a lot of focus on climate change in Glasgow in November with COP26. COP15 is coming up in the last week of April and the first week of June this week. Again, it's the United Nations, the Conference of the Parties, the United Nations Framework Convention on Biodiversity. It's been held in Kuming, and it would be interesting to see, does it get the same level of support that the one on climate change got? Now, the reality is, are we still taking seriously what fossil fuel is doing to our atmosphere? And in many situations, this is what is changing, is causing extinction. For example, we would notice here in Ireland that the spring now comes 4 to 5 weeks ahead of what it did 40 or 50 years ago. So what impact is that going to have on insects, etc. in this area? So global warming, biodiversity in Ireland is, as I said, it's poor in the biodiversity. We have roughly 2/3 of Britain's biodiversity, a mere 1,600 or 16,000 insects and 1,000 native flowering plants. More than 150 species, birds, animals, insects are facing extinction here in Ireland. Yeah, these are some of the species that got extinct in the past. The Irish elk, bears, and wolves. Some of the birds that are going extinct: the curlew, the yellowhammer, choughs, and even cuckoo. I haven't certainly didn't hear a cuckoo last year here in Ireland. But again, flowering species, corncockle, chamomile, shepherd's needle are all becoming extinct. As late as the 1960s, buttercups, bluebells, primroses that decorate almost every field. Now they're being replaced by a few species of ryegrass, which has an enormous impact on biodiversity. So we could go on to the next slide. Yeah. Some of the forests in Ireland. Juniper was one of the first to reach Ireland after the end of the Ice Age, followed by pine, hazel, elm. Elm, of course, has major problems over the last 20 or 30 years. Oak and elm forests were established in areas 8,000 500 years ago, and other species, ash and Scots pine and birch as well. A major change, of course, was the introduction of agriculture in Ireland 5,500 years ago. And the arrival of the plough also then began to put more and more pressure on forests. Yeah. Yes. The Irish forests have done very well in the second millennium. Ireland has the best growing condition of any country in Europe, and yet we have one of the lowest forests at this moment. For the first 1,000 years, there was quite an area, but the 17th, 18th century attacks on the forests. The wood was used for shipbuilding, was also used for charcoal for the burning iron industry in Britain. And so it is very, very low at the moment. And of course, people don't like planting native species because they take too long to grow. So they plant species that they can make more money out of. Yes. So that's the foundation of the state in the 1920s. The bulk of our planting is made of non-native conifer species like thick spruce rather than native species. And this is not great for a country like Ireland. A lot more planting could be put, and now, of course, it will have to be put in the context of addressing climate change, because one of the few realities that take out of the atmosphere are trees. So we go to the next slide, please. The one after this, because I got rid of a lot of those. Another area that's under threat here in Ireland is our bogs. But at least some decisions have been taken in the last few years that are actually going to change that hugely in the next 10 years. So the bogs will be seen as an area again in terms of climate change, taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. Next slide, please. Again, the structure of the bogs put pressure on merlins, ottos, red grouse, and also butterflies and dragonflies. So the reality is the extraordinary change in agriculture in the 1960s and 70s have put huge pressure on land here. As I say, in many fields up till then, you had 3 or 4 or up to 10 species of grass and wildflowers. That has all changed. And basically, you're talking about 3 or 4 different species of ryegrass, which actually needs chemicals, nitrogen. And where does it end up? It ends up in the rivers. So that's causing a huge lot of pressure also on water pollution. So again, these are issues that are being discussed here in Ireland at present, like climate change. 35% of our greenhouse gases comes actually from agriculture, from methane, and yet we're increasing our health dramatically. Can we continue to do that? I don't think we can. Yesterday, for example, the Supreme Court here in Ireland gave a ruling that an Irish dairy company with a Dutch dairy company can actually build a cheese plant here in Ireland, which will take 450 million litres of milk every year. Now, what about the extra cows that are going to be there to produce that milk? And we're not taking that seriously at all. Yeah. So, biodiversity, Chris Mark said there are 75,000 edible plants around our world, and that's we depend on those. The vast majority are dependent on only about 200 species of plants and animals for the bulk of their diet, which is not very good actually, because some of these become extinct, and we should have a lot more greater diversity in where we get our food from. So cereals, maize, wheat, rye, root crops, for the staple diet of half the population of the world. A mere 10 species of birds, animals provide the genetic material for over 90% of all species. And that again is challenging, because if something happens, a lot of those may become extinct in the next 20 or 30 years. Biodiversity is central actually to human health, as we'll see. Yeah. The species in the rainforest are in maintaining and improving human health. It's estimated over 50% of the 150 prescribed drugs with an economic value of $80 billion are derived from discoveries in the wild, mainly in the tropical rainforest. So again, a lot of our drugs are coming from there. Here's Professor Wilson that I introduced the program with, making the point again that it's there's a cert between plants and animals going extinct, and that they will be for us, for our food, and not just us, for other species in our food and in our medicine. Yes. Here's quinine, was derived from the bark of South American tree, and it's important in malaria, as is the rose periwinkle in leukemia. So there are many different examples of species being used in our healthcare. Here's another one also. We'll go on to the next slide. Some of these I had taken out, but anyway. Religions and biodiversity are very much a central part of all life on the planet. We need, basically, we have an ambivalent relationship towards the natural world, with Manichaeism, with St. Augustine, that the natural world was damaged by original sin, the condemnations of Pelagius, all of those sort of things made it quite difficult for us to take on seriously the reality of the wonder and beauty of the natural world that God's given for us. So basically, Pelagius, he wrote a letter to a friend: look at the animals roaring in the forest, God's spirit dwells in them. Look at the birds flying across the sky. There's no creature on earth in whom God is absent. So, but he wasn't acceptable at the time. Yeah. One of the things the Roman authorities were critical of his practice of teaching women to read the scriptures, and his passion for justice and also for the distribution of wealth. What annoyed Augustine most was his teaching that the image of God could be seen in the face only of a newborn baby that had been baptized. So then the next slide. In many ways, if the Western tradition had followed Columban, we would have a much better appreciation of the natural world. He said, if you want to know the Creator, learn about creation, because creation tells us about the wonder of creation. Yeah. In the Middle Ages, we did have Saint Benedict, his vow of stability, and also sustainable agriculture, and that's very important. We go on to the next slide. And Francis saw the divine in all reality. The brothers were expected to live lightly on the earth, a burden neither to the earth or to met their subsistence needs. So the natural world is not viewed from a utilitarian point of view. This is very important in Laudato Si, because very often we looked at the natural world as meeting our needs and not actually meeting its own needs and the wonder and beauty and gratitude we should have for the gift of life. Yeah. So kinship with all creation should be central to our reality of our Christian faith. Yeah. We had this, associated with flee the world in the monastic tradition, but we also had it in, a lot of our prayers. For example, the post-communion prayers before Advent, the 4 Sundays of Advent was teach us to despise the things of earth and to love the things of heaven. And even in the Rosary, the Salve Regina, mourning and weeping in this valley of tears. Well, it's a valley of wonder as well. And, you know, yeah, there's a feeling that nature could seduce people. So, yes, but the reality was that life is central to the gospel of Jesus. I've come that they may have life and have it to the full. And it's in the natural world we experience that too. Respect of life is very much central to in the scriptures. Choose life so that you and your descendants would live in the book of Deuteronomy. Respect for life was seen as a central institute of the Sabbath. Yes. The incarnation, extraordinary affirmation of the goodness and intrinsic value of all creation. He is the bread of life, who presents himself as giving his life for the world. And of course, again, that wonderful quotation from John 10:10, I've come that they may have life and have it to the full. So the theme of stewardship is central to the biblical tradition. The tale that keeps the garden. Stewardship is seen as a sensitive way Israelis looked after the land. In Israel, the land was the heritage of all the people. It was meant to sustain the whole community into the future. So today I offer you a choice, life or death. Choose life that you or your descendants may live. So the Christian churches must get together. We should become more sensitive to this extraordinary challenge to us in our time. I would say it as more challenging, although it's related to climate change, but more challenging, because when species are wiped out, they're gone forever. That's the awful reality of the future. Integral justice generation. What has brought this about? We have extraordinary technologies, but we're not always sure when we should be using them. Future generations have a right to inherit a world as fertile and as beautiful as the one we inhabit now. This is an area that has come to us from Latin America and from other parts of the world. But there's an abiding tragedy. The country like the Philippines, which are poor economically, are very, very rich in species. And it would be awful if they'd lost that into the future. Here we have a quotation from St. Thomas and then Bonaventure. In actual fact, Thomas's Albert the Great was one of the few people who actually looked to draw up a list of species in his time. I think he counted a couple of 1,000, whereas now we know there certainly is probably 5 to 10 million species in our planet. So God loves all the creatures. We humans are linked to them through close biological and genetic ties. Given our parents' ecological challenges, either the whole biosphere will prosper or we'll all go down together. That's an extraordinary reality. So it's something that should unite all religions. There's no Muslim forest, there's no Catholic lakes, there's no Luther. In other words, it's a work for all religions, and all religions can bring something to this and make it a central focus of Christian-Muslim dialogue. Ecologically sustainable people must concern itself with the rights of future generations and the rights of other species that we haven't taken seriously at all in the past. Yeah. So live lightly on the earth. Look at our human ecological footprint. Look at human levels of population. The planet at the moment has 7.8 billion people. That's almost 8 times more than there was when the last pandemic hit the world in 1990. So we could move up to 11 billion species by 2050. So again, we have to look at ourselves in that area. An awesome task facing this generation, one of the most awesome tasks facing this generation. And if we don't do it, we can't say we'll do it in the future because, as I say, every species, once it becomes extinct, is gone forever. Thank you. So these are the kind of questions that will come up, coming up to the last week of April and the first week of May, preparing for COP15 in Kuming. And again, what's the Catholic Church going to say? And as I say, Laudato Si is extraordinarily good. The Earth's resources are being plundered. This is number 32. It's been plundered because of short-sighted approaches to the economy, commerce, and production. The loss of forests and woodlands entails a loss of species that may constitute extraordinary important resources for the future, not only for food, but for curing our disease and other uses. So, Laudato Si is on board, and it's very central to the ministry of Pope Francis. But we must make it central to our ministry, and we need to do things that can bring about major in our country at this time. Thank you.
We'll now begin to have our breakout rooms. You will be separated into different rooms. You'll have to accept.
Learning about ministry, preparing to be a missionary. I didn't hear a single word on the relationship between humans and the natural world. If I was in a church, I'd go down to an oak tree because the oak, they support about 350 other species of plants, animals, and insects. And that's exactly what the church should be. So in other words, we have to get our knowledge base improved dramatically. Now, because this was true of every seminary. So this will have to be a church thing rather than a thing driven by priests, because they in the seminary learn very little about it. So you would begin to take then a group within the church. First of all, to talk about it more often, to see the relationship, particularly with the seasons, the relationship with the species. But then it depends where you are. If you were in a rural area, for example, in Ireland or Britain, as I said, the impact on agriculture has been huge. Could we become part of that debate? And to involve people in the debate, like people who are teaching science at school, biology or botany, they're people. And to come then to a situation of a parish, what are the issues around this in our parish? And begin to list them. So obviously, one thing that all of us can do is live more simply. But again, how do we do that? But then are there other issues? Like, for example, I'm here in a college where, when it was built, everyone thought lawns were pretty. They were imported here from Britain and from Ireland or from France. So even now, to get people to allow the wildflowers to grow for even 2 months of the summer, they haven't been thinking along that lines. So we've got to start thinking about that. Maybe other groups will decide to work with other groups in your local area. For example, I'm a member of Birdwatch Ireland because I think it's very important, because 30% of our species of birds have vanished, and many of them, when I was growing up, were abundant. So to get involved in something like that, or to make connections with other environmental groups and ask them to come in and share what we might be willing to do. What we could do is, connected to our Christian faith and our theology, begin to pray about it as be a central issue of our world. If Professor Wilson is right that this is the most serious issue facing our planet, not just human beings, that we must, if we say we're truly religious, we must begin to see that as something that we can be involved in.
Thank
So,
you.
this happens through a community rather than through individuals.
Yes. We will have a petition in the chats later on from Laudato Si movement, which is going to petition the governments at COP15.
Yeah.
And everyone will get it in the chat. So we want to, how do we influence decision makers in the UK? That's one of the questions. That's one of the answers. We'll have the petition to join.
But the petition will be different from wherever your parish is. City parishes, what can be done actually to increase biodiversity in cities? Because city people have the same need to look and wonder at the beauty of creation too. And I know some towns that are trying to do that. And I think it's basically a new way of understanding our connectedness with all creation and beginning to take care of it.
One of the question is, how can we encourage everyone to realize that paradise is here, right now on earth?
Well, as I said, when I was talking to you about the Advent prayer, teach us to despise the things of this world and to love the things of heaven. That's where a lot of our prayer was. If we have, like the prayer in Laudato Si, that celebrates the natural world, to see a total connectedness with the natural world, and that we are central to that, then our prayer life will change. And I think that needs to happen here too. But the issues that we would face, for example, in country areas, in Ireland and Britain, we have to begin to look again at the kind of agriculture that grew up from the petrochemical agriculture that grew up from the 1970s, and begin to look much more at organic production into the future. Now that will take a lot of changes, and it mightn't be acceptable in some areas. And I say, like here in this college, to get people to actually leave the lawns on board, people wouldn't know what to do with it. And even just to leave a few areas where we will see the wildflowers. So there's a lot of prejudice within ourselves that we're not necessarily totally aware of, and we need to become aware of it.
One other question is, how do we persuade clergy to regard biodiversity and its defense as a constituent?
Well, as I said to you, I didn't learn anything. I mean, since I came back here, I've learned that there's almost every tree and the grasses. It wasn't considered important. I don't know if anyone would have heard a single even lecture about. You heard lectures on liberation theology and those sort of things, but we haven't. So that's why it will not be the clergy that will lead us into this. Now, I hope the clergy are open to it and see it as an extraordinary reality for a new form of spirituality and a new form of prayer. And I think it will enrich our lives hugely. But we will do it better with other people who have more knowledge. I mean, that's what my own situation, when I got the few months to study with Tom Berry and all the people he was bringing in, particularly biologists, that's where I began to learn the connectedness of this to my own life and to my life as a missionary.
Yeah. One of the questions was, how can we help parishes to understand the threat of biodiversity and take on board the need to change our lifestyles?
Well, again, we could take one or two issues at a time. Maybe some year, maybe focus on what's happening to birds in our area, what's happening to the natural world of plants and animals and insects, and become more speak about it much more and make connections about it much more. So, and I would see that, as I said, happening in community. If parishes set up a justice, peace, integrity of creation group in the parish, then begin to look at what could we change here? How can we do it? And what action can we take now and to enrich our own lives hugely, and then also protect other species. And we need to speak to politicians of all kinds, local politicians, national politicians in Europe, that we support this, because one of the issues that I'm aware of as someone who's been involved in this for many, many years is that people say things, but they don't always mean what they say. Just look at the paper I was looking to say, The Guardian looked at what companies are claiming about their climate change regulations, particularly ones in the fuel industry. Basically, they're saying this is not happening at all. So we have to keep people like that honest into the future, and that's part of the prophetic mission of the church.
Very good. One comment is, or question is, the church owns 177 million acres of land worldwide. Can we use our own land to be prophetic?
Yes, I would like to see that, but it's very difficult. Like I've been arguing here that we would have got into organic dairy many years ago, and it didn't happen. You know, so. But it'll only happen if we see these as
would you
important.
be prepared to make your presentation to one of?
Pardon? Sorry? I lost that. Something has happened.
I can hear you, Father Sean.
Yeah. Daniel, I can't hear you, can I?
I can hear you. I think he's frozen.
Pardon?
Daniel's frozen.
I'm all right now. Can you hear me now?
I can, yes. Yeah.
We asked, would you be prepared to make your presentation to one of the UK government select committees?
Oh yeah, I would, of course, yeah. And here, I mean, I'm here. I'm working here in Ireland, for example. Our largest environmental organisation here is called Untitled, and I'm actually the president of it. So we're actually putting a lot of pressure on the Irish government going to Kuming, particularly on the area that I like, with 35% of our greenhouse gases is due to methane. We're one of the only countries in the world, Ireland and New Zealand, where agricultural produce are actually that high. In Britain, it's, I think, 18 or 19%. So we have to, is this the way forward in the future? Are we going to start, how do we change our diet into the future? Is it going to be milk and animal feed into the future? These are serious questions. And I think at parish level, we could be to discuss that and to look at say doctors giving us advice. What are better plans for human beings in the future? So, and so I'd also like to see it us taking this serious. Like I was amazed with Laudato Si, because as I said, the previous autumn, previous August in 2014, Cardinal Tuxton said they were not going to. And what he has put into this, like even in that one sentence I read from number 32, that the economy, commerce, and production have undermined all of this climate change. To get that into our Catholic way of thinking would be huge, and it is one of the great services that Pope Francis has given us. Now, if the rest of us, or what about our Episcopal commissions? again, they can help to educate us and get people in the Catholic and the religious community. As I said, this is not a religious issue as Christianity versus it's every religion needs to be on this into the future because it's the most serious issue facing our planet.
One final questions. What hopes have you for COP15 in China? Any good news?
Well, I had hoped initially for 2 years ago to go to it, but I don't think I will now. But I would hope that at least it'll get as much publicity. And I'm talking about publicity here in Ireland with COP26, and that practical things will be discussed and decisions made. So, this is the Conference of the Parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Biodiversity haven't met every year. That's why this is only COP15. I went to most of the early COPs for climate change, but so this one hasn't really struck the same level as the one on climate change, even though I think it is more important. So I'd hope that we begin to take it much more seriously in the future. And it'd be interesting to see will religious people. I remember going to COPs right until the one in Copenhagen that the Catholic Church had nothing to do with. I mean, the people who were really good were the World Council of Churches and the Anglican community. So this is new for us, and it's right back to Laudato Si. And for your group in your parish, even just take up Laudato Si and actually work through it, because there's an enormous amount of new information there for talking about our way of living and worshipping as Catholic Christians, human beings.
There was a lot of talk Pope Francis was going to Glasgow, but is he going to China?
I don't think so, but I'd hope that someone from the church, building on what we have connected in Laudato Si, which actually became, as I said, I remember going to most of these COPs in the past, and with Poland, South America, and Africa. The World Council of Churches were they had a theology and they had the science to back it. That's what we've got from Laudato Si, and I think we should be extraordinarily grateful, but now begin to act on it in our local parishes. And the local parishes will always be different, because the wonder reality is things are different where we live. And but if we begin to take that on board, I think there could be great hope for the Catholic Church in the future. And in fact, people who may not be worshiping with us every Sunday may see here are a serious group of people who are concerned about climate change and the destruction of biodiversity.
Thank you very much. What was I going to say?
Just one point again, like this book was only published in 2004. There were 27 pages on human work,
Right.
which is very important, and Catholic social teaching. There were 16 pages on God's environment, and only one paragraph on biodiversity, one paragraph on climate change. So that's an enormous change in less than 20 years. And we need to take that on board and run with it.
Thank you very much. We will have some links in chat about petitions you can sign.
Sure.
And I'd like to thank everyone for taking part tonight. The slides will be made available for chat as well. I'd like to thank everyone for attending tonight. We're coming to a close.
Can I